There is a cave in northern Nevada that the United States government does not want you to enter. Not because of bats, not because of unstable rock, not because of any of the clean, reasonable explanations that appear on the federal signage bolted to the steel bars that seal its entrance. They sealed it because of what was found inside it, and because of what that discovery meant for every assumption modern archaeology has spent over a century carefully constructing. The story begins in 1911, when two commercial miners broke through the surface layer of a cave floor and found something that the institutions they reported it to immediately moved to contain. But to understand what they found, and why it had to be buried again as quickly as it was uncovered, we have to go back much further than 1911. We have to go back to a time when Nevada was not a desert, when the caves were not empty, and when something walked these canyons that modern history has spent an entire century pretending never existed. Stay with us, because the lock on that gate has a story behind it. And tonight, we are going to read every word of it. 10,000 years ago, Nevada was not a desert. During the last ice age, a massive inland sea called Lake Lahontan covered over 8,000 square miles of the American West. Its waters ran deep through the valleys of what is now Nevada, Utah, and California, filling the landscape with life, sustaining enormous populations of fish and wildlife, and carving elaborate cave networks into the limestone cliffs along its shores. When the climate shifted and the waters slowly receded across thousands of years, the caves remained. And because of the extreme dryness of the Nevada desert air and the unique chemical composition of the cave floors, anything left inside those caves was preserved with extraordinary precision. Not decayed, not destroyed, mummified, frozen in time, waiting in the dark with a patience measured in millennia. Mainstream archaeology has always maintained a comfortable narrative about who occupied these caves during and after the Ice Age. Nomadic hunter-gatherers, simple people, stone tools and woven baskets. Nothing that would require rewriting a textbook. But the caves did not read the textbooks. And when the miners arrived, what they found in the deep, undisturbed layers beneath the cave floors did not match a single page of the approved narrative. The deeper they dug, the more the timeline began to crack. And the cracks have never been filled. Not honestly. Before the miners arrived, before the archaeologists, before the federal signs and the steel bars and the institutional silence, the Paiute people already knew what was in the caves. They had always known. For generations, longer than any written record extends, the Paiute nation carried an oral history about a race that occupied the Great Basin before them. They called them the Si-Te-Cah. The description was consistent across every telling. They were tall, far taller than ordinary people. Their hair was not dark like the Paiute. It was red, bright, distinct, unmistakably red. They were hostile, cannibalistic, occupying the cave networks of the region with a territorial ferocity that made coexistence impossible. According to the oral history, a coalition of tribes from across the region eventually united against the Si-Te-Cah. After generations of conflict, the final survivors were tracked to a cave. Brush was stacked across the entrance. It was set on fire. The Si-Te-Cah burned, and the cave was sealed. For over a century, mainstream anthropologists filed this story under mythology, campfire legend, the kind of oral tradition that primitive cultures invent to explain things they don't understand. Then, the miners arrived, and the campfire legend walked out of the ground and introduced itself. 1911. Lovelock Cave, Nevada. Two commercial miners, David Pugh and James Hart, enter the cave to harvest bat guano. The guano layer is over 4 feet deep, commercially valuable, and they work quickly through the upper strata without paying much attention to what lies beneath it. Then, their tools hit something else. Artifacts, preserved with extraordinary clarity by the dry desert air. Woven duck decoys, constructed from tule reeds, so precisely crafted that modern archaeologists who examined them decades later describe the work as remarkable by any standard. Complex fishing nets, intricately woven baskets, sandals. This alone would have been significant. But the miners kept digging. And deeper, beneath the artifacts, beneath the tool layer, beneath everything the approved timeline said should be there, they found the bodies. Mummified human remains, preserved in extraordinary detail by thousands of years of dry cave air. Still intact, still identifiable. The hair was still attached to the skulls, and it was red. Not faded, not discolored by age or mineral contact. Distinctly, naturally, unmistakably red. Exactly as the Paiute oral tradition had described for generations that no academic had taken serious. The physical dimensions of the skeletons were recorded in local newspaper accounts and early field notes. Multiple remains measured between 7 and 8 feet in length. And among the artifacts recovered alongside the bodies, a woven sandal, 15 inches long. A 15-inch sandal corresponds to a modern U.S. men's size 18 to 20. It is a size worn exclusively by individuals standing well over 7 feet tall. In the entire modern world, only a handful of living humans wear shoes that large. That sandal is in a glass case in a small Nevada museum today. The person who wore it is in a basement somewhere that no independent researcher has ever been permitted to access. And the cave they came from is behind a steel gate with a federal lock. Think about that. The initial finds from Lovelock Cave were reported publicly. The 1912 Nevada newspaper accounts are real. They still exist in archive collections and can be accessed by researchers today. The University of California conducted follow-up excavations in 1912 and again in 1924. Their findings were partially published in academic journals. Partially. The published records documented the duck decoys, the fishing nets, the baskets, the cultural artifacts that fit comfortably within the approved narrative of primitive cave-dwelling hunter-gatherers. The skeletal remains, the oversized, red-haired bodies that confirmed the physical reality of the Si-Te-Cah, received a different treatment. Some specimens were distributed to private collections in the chaos of the early excavations. Some reached university repositories, and the most significant remains, the ones that most directly challenged the official timeline, were transferred to institutional storage facilities whose contents are not publicly cataloged. The same pattern we have traced across every investigation on this channel. Discovery, verification, collection, silence.
But Lovelock Cave adds a dimension that the Ohio Mounds and the Grand Canyon did not. It adds the physical closure of the site itself. Because locking the bones in a basement removes the evidence from public view, but it does not prevent future excavations from producing more evidence. It does not stop the next generation of researchers from entering the same cave and finding what the first generation found. Unless you seal the cave. And that is exactly what happened. Lovelock Cave, along with dozens of other cave systems across the Great Basin that independent researchers had begun investigating, was sealed under federal jurisdiction. Steel bars, iron grates, security locks, federal signage. Public safety, bat conservation, fragile ecosystems. Clean explanations. Safe explanations. For caves that independent researchers had already begun finding things in, the bones were locked in a basement. The cave was locked behind steel bars, and anyone who asked too many questions was handed a pamphlet about endangered bats.
Lovelock Cave is not an isolated case. It is one data point in a pattern that covers the entire North American continent. We have documented the giant skeletal remains found in the burial mounds of Ohio and West Virginia, recorded in the Smithsonian's own published reports and then removed from public access. We have documented the underground citadel carved into the walls of the Grand Canyon, reported on the front page of a major Arizona newspaper in 1909, and then erased from every institutional record that follows. We have documented the pre-Ice Age metal objects pulled from geological strata that predate human existence by hundreds of millions of years, verified by independent labs, and then locked in institutional archives. Lovelock Cave adds a new dimension to this pattern, because here, for the first time, the cover-up is not just administrative, it is physical. You cannot enter this cave. You cannot conduct your own excavation. You cannot verify or challenge the official record because the site itself has been removed from any possibility of independent investigation.
A basement full of bones can theoretically be accessed through legal channels, freedom of information requests, academic credentials, institutional cooperation. A cave behind a federal steel gate cannot. The escalation from administrative silence to physical closure tells you something important about what is inside. When locking away the evidence is no longer sufficient, when the site itself has to be sealed, the thing being protected is not a bat colony. It is a truth. A truth large enough and threatening enough to justify drilling steel bars into ancient rock and posting federal signs in the middle of an empty desert where almost no one will ever see them. Ask yourself, what kind of truth requires that level of containment? And then ask yourself what else is behind a gate somewhere that you have never been told to look for.
The sandal is in the glass case. The bones are in the basement. The cave is behind the gate. And the story the Paiute people carried for generations, the story that every academic institution called mythology until the miners proved it real, is sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere under a classification that no public researcher has ever been permitted to request. The Si-Te-Cah were real. The oral tradition was not mythology, it was memory. Preserved across centuries the same way the bodies were preserved in the cave. Kept dry, kept intact, kept away from the elements that would destroy it. Until the moment someone finally broke through the surface and found what was waiting underneath.
Every investigation on this channel has led to the same place, the same pattern, the same institutions, the same administrative silence descending over the same categories of evidence, like a curtain that was designed to never be pulled back. The Ohio Mounds, the Grand Canyon Citadel, the pre-Ice Age artifacts, the giant skeletons. The Ohio Mounds, the Grand Canyon Citadel, the pre-Ice Age artifacts, the giant skeletons, the Lovelock Cave. They are not separate mysteries. They are chapters in a single story. A story about a world that existed before the one we were taught about. A world that was larger, stranger, and far more complex than any institution with a reputation to protect has ever been willing to acknowledge. The gate is still locked.
But gates have a weakness that the people who install them rarely consider. They can only lock out the living. They cannot lock in the truth. We are Relic of Time. Subscribe, and let's keep pulling back the curtain together.